All right, hello everyone, it's silverkyle, and welcome to my January 2024 wrap-up, where I talk about all the books that I read in the month of January. We have 4 books here in the order that I read them, so I'll kind of give a brief idea of what I thought about each individually, and then we'll talk about my book of the month at the very end. So let's start off with the first book that I read in the new year, that being The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, book 1 of The Wheel of Time. What a bang to start with the new year. I love The Eye of the World. And this is my at least third, but I think it's my 4th reread of this book. I've tried to finish The Wheel of Time so many times, and every time I got sidetracked. And then when I'd be like, okay, it's time to start and try to finish The Wheel of Time finally, I'd be like, well, you got to start at the beginning because you get to reread the Eye of the World. I love this book. It is such a good book 1. To introduce a new world, new characters, a new magic system. The lore and world building that Jordan has created here has to be in the top 3 fantasy authors. Like, this is so fleshed out. You've got, different forms of politics. You've got individual characters that are feeling specific ways. You've got some farmers that have humble beginnings where they've always been in the same small town, and they get to see the world for the first time and see that myths and legends are real, and that there is a crazy big world out there that you are being introduced to at the same time as them as you follow along as they go about this long trek that does seem a little bit like Lord of the Rings, and there are similarities definitely, but that's not a knock. And this still has its own unique flavor that even though in this book it is somewhat similar, it's still very unique in its own. And once you go on to the next book in the series, it completely creates its own path. So I love this book. I would say that 90% of it is a 10, and then the rest just slows down a little bit. And my only qualms with it really is that the main villain is not very intimidating. I feel that the army that they have is much more intimidating, especially the ones that control the army, like the generals, if you want to say. They're a lot more intimidating and interesting. And then the ending is a little bit felt like it was shoehorned in. Kind of felt a little bit rushed, but it's by no means bad. It's just that going from a 10 to about a 7 at the very end is what happens. Still very enjoyable, and I love this book. Midway through, there's a part where 2 of the main characters are kind of separated from the main group, and they're going from farmers, like kind of staying on farms and other small towns and then big cities, going into different inns and just trying to earn their keep and stay alive, and they're extremely tired. And on paper, that sounds extremely boring, but it is done in such a fun way that is one of my favorite parts. Their little adventure that they have as they're going on their own is great. I absolutely love it. It's good stuff. On the complete flip side of that, I then read The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. And I have a full review of The Eye of the World and The Atlas 6 if you want to see my non-spoilers and spoiler thoughts go much more into detail. Although I would say that the Atlas 6 review is more of a rant because I detest this book. This is by far the worst book that I have ever read in my entire existence. There's nothing that even comes close to being as bad as the Atlas 6. You live in the minds of 6 extremely narcissistic, egotistical characters that have only faults, that are kind of seen as the heroes of this story, I guess. This is book 1 of 3, and I will never read book 2. That's never happening. So I have no idea where this is going to go. I hope that in the end, they all die horrible deaths where they are, told that they are miserable failures, that they have never amounted to anything, that nobody will ever hear about them, that their names will be taken out of the history pages, and that they are going to die horribly excruciating painful deaths. Maybe just locked up and they'll get to survive through some kind of magic where they live for hundreds of years, but they're locked up for the rest of their lives would be the only justice that I could get from reading, like this series finishing. I hate this book. Do not read it under any circumstance. It's crap. I don't understand why people are reading this book. Or why I get... It makes sense for people to be reading it because so many people are talking about it. And I saw, okay, well, a lot of people are talking about this on TikTok, YouTube, BookTube, whatever you want to call it. And then I read it and I'm like, this isn't good. why are we talking about this book? If people are ranting about it, it would make a lot more sense. Everybody should be ranting about this book. It's horrible. And I totally get that some people have specific likes that are different from mine. Why would you want to read about the worst characters, the worst people in the world? It's like, think about all the negative traits of billionaires or politicians that are extremely corrupt and so full of themselves. You'd be living in the lives of 6 individuals like that have nothing positive to talk about. Like, you can start off with a good anti-hero that has some faults that eventually turns at the very end, but because it's the faults that they had weren't nearly as bad as what these individuals think. It's because you're living in their minds, so you see exactly what they think about everybody and everything around them. And it just makes you want to throw up with how like stuck up they are on themselves. It's just trash. Anyway, let's move on to something a little bit better. Not by by a lot on one end. Yes, this is a lot better, but I was still a little bit sadly underwhelmed by Only If You're Lucky by Stacey Willingham. I had finished All the Dangerous Things by Stacey Willingham last year, and I very much enjoyed that book. So I was kind of hoping that I would like this one too. And it's just not as good. The characters aren't as fun, and it could be the setting as well. It's a bunch of young women that are attending college, and there's a mystery that happens, but it only happens like much closer to the end of the book, like 60% of the way through. And then once you get there, it's a lot better. But the ending is kind of, once again, just kind of and just not my cup of tea. But I could totally see some people still enjoying this much more than I did. And it's not necessarily a bad book. It's just very underwhelming, unfortunately. I wanted a lot more from this. And last but not least, we have Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. This is a massive book. It's about the same length as Wheel of Time there. It's 700 pages, like 725, 730 pages. And I struggled with this quite a bit. Not in the same sense as Atlas 6, because that's just not possible to hit unless it's another Olivia Blake book, I believe. But the writing style of The Empire of the Vampire does not suit my tastes at all. I can definitely see that some people would still like this and appreciate it and love it even, but it didn't really work well for me, and I haven't really found any other book that kind of has a writing style that just really wasn't my flavor. But the story at times kept me completely captivated. It's a very unique, different tale about basically in the past 27 years, daylight doesn't really exist. It's much darker than it used to be. So vampires have been able to kind of take over, and it's very, dreadful. And we've got, it's very different, kind of like a post-apocalyptic world with vampires kind of taking over. Great premise, and they execute it quite well. I don't really like that it's also told in a style where it's the main character is telling a story about the past, and that's how you get your story here. So I don't really like that kind of storytelling. But it was more so the writing here that just didn't really mesh well with me. But the story just kept hooking me, and I'd be like, okay, we'll just keep reading it, and we'll finish this book, and we won't get the sequel that comes out in March. And I kept reading it, and then some crazy big battles happen, and some crazy epic moments where it is just an incredible scene that was played in my mind, and I could see it being made into a movie or a TV show. And I'm hooked, and then I'm into it, and then I'm getting into the characters, and I'm getting into what the main character is trying to do. And I'm starting to like characters, and I'm starting to see little moments of brilliance where they say something, and I'm like, that's so good. That's so good. I don't know if this is like against religion or not against religion, or just kind of shows you how so many people view religion, because it's very religion based, and kind of the main character is very much against if there is a God. They're not helping out. They're kind of, very evil to a degree. So I'm thinking, well, but then certain things happen, and you're kind of trying to figure out what the heck is going on. That's the great thing. I still don't know necessarily what Jay Kristoff religious? Is he not religious? I don't know. And that's great, because I don't want Jay Kristoff to necessarily say he is or he isn't, because I don't want that from a book. I want both sides to be talked. If you're going to talk about politics or religion, give me both sides and don't specifically say which one is right or wrong. That's the way you do that, because I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear any preaching for either side. I'm okay with you touching those subjects if you go about it this way. And that J. Kurosawa, I think, did a great job in that. Just the writing isn't the great. The writing didn't work for me. So I will definitely be doing reviews for both of these to go a little bit more in depth with non-spoilers and then spoilers afterwards. I'll probably be doing that this week for both of them, actually. I'll start off with Only If You're Lucky, and then I'll do Empire of the Vampire at the very end of the week. And I will I originally said that I wouldn't read the sequel, but I think that because near the end I started enjoying a little bit more, I most likely will be reading the sequel to this in March. It hooked me enough that at the end that I'm kind of like, oh, I gotta see where this goes. It's an interesting world. So let's go over my book of the month. Hands down, it's Eye of the World. And I think that this might be a trend whenever I do read a Wheel of Time book, for at least at the beginning, because I do like a lot of those that I have read before. I'm hoping that we're going to have some months where it's not, and because that'll be very exciting for me, because it'll be something that's outside of Wheel of Time that's better than that, and then that's crazy because they're kind of held so high up on the pedestal already for me. So that means that I had a great reading month. But yeah, Eye of the World, hands down for this month, by far wins. It's just a great book one. Read this. It's good stuff. Could you imagine if it was the Atlas 6? That would be, if this was the best book of the month. I would be needing counseling. I would be going to therapy. That would be the worst possible month of my life, probably, if that was the case. I'm exaggerating here. This is a joke. It's crap, though. That's not a joke. It is just absolute filth. So there you have it. That is everything that I read in the month of January. I'm hoping that... So kind of a lukewarm month, honestly. Like, worst book that I've ever read. Kind of let down by Only If You're Lucky. Kind of in between with Empire of the Vampire. And thank God that Wheel of Time was there, because... Whew, that would have been a horrible month. I'm hoping that things progress as we go through the future months. So thank you all for watching. What did you read in the month of January? And we'll talk to y'all next time. Beardage.